Good afternoon, and welcome to the ALCTS webinar, Just Catalog It, Providing Access to 3D Materials. I'm Eva Sorrell, a member of the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Our presenters today are Diane Robson, Kevin Yanowski, and Catherine Sassen. Diane is Media Librarian at the University of North Texas. She manages collection development, cataloging, and outreach related to games and gaming for the UNT libraries. Diane plans and hosts events that bring students and Denton residents together to play, learn, and create games. Kevin is the Catalog Management Librarian at the University of North Texas Libraries. He is interested in research on cataloging unique collections, patron catalog interaction, and accessibility in electronic resources. Catherine is Principal Catalog Librarian at the University of North Texas Libraries. She has published and presented on cataloging, indexing, assessment, and career development. The presentation today will discuss how to make games and other 3D materials accessible for users. A few things to keep in mind for today's presentation. Today's webinar does not have interactive chat capabilities. If you wish to comment on today's presentation using Twitter, you may use the hashtag you see on the screen. We will not be monitoring the Twitter feed. If you have questions for the presenters, please type them into the question box on your screen, and they will answer them as time permits at the end of their presentation. Questions which remain unanswered while we are on the air will be answered offline and the answers sent to all attendees. This webinar is being recorded, and you'll receive an email with links to the recording, the presentation slides, and an evaluation within 2 days. Now, there may be a slight delay as I turn the presentation over to Catherine.
Have you ever searched a library catalog and become frustrated at not being able to find what you were looking for? Of course you have. We all have, and it is frustrating. Well, today my colleagues and I are going to talk about enhancing discoverability so that we can avoid this frustration, and we will specifically focus on the discoverability of three-dimensional materials. My name is Catherine Sassen. I'm the Principal Catalog Librarian at the University of North Texas. With me today are my colleagues, Diane Robson, Media Librarian, and Kevin Yanowski, Catalog Management Librarian, all from the University of North Texas. Here's an outline of what we'll be covering today. I'll provide an introduction to our presentation, then Diane will talk about cataloging 3D materials with RDA and genre terms. Then Kevin will talk about implementing facets on the online catalog. He'll provide a summary of our presentation, and then he will open the floor for questions. First, we're going to talk about why we need to tweak our cataloging practices to help users find 3D materials. It can be a challenge to search for 3D materials because catalog searches for these items don't always provide conclusive results. If these items are housed in closed stacks, the process of discovery is even more complicated. Many 3D materials aren't described by authorized genre terms, so that's another challenge. The use of genre terms and facets can benefit both library users and library staff because they will make catalog searching more efficient and effective. Good genre terms will reflect the language of the users and make it easier for them to find resources. Library staff members will benefit from enhanced searching because that will make it easier for them to co-locate similar resources, generate recommendations for users, and create programming around genres. But before we talk about enhancements, we need to discuss the need for catalog records. Barbara Jones has written that uncatalogued collections are inaccessible to our communities. If collections are not cataloged, they are essentially hidden from the user. Another consideration to keep in mind is that an uncatalogued collection is more vulnerable to loss and theft. Still, another concern is collection development. If you don't have a record of what you purchased, it's possible that you may end up duplicating some of your titles. One category of 3D materials that we will be talking about today is tabletop games. Unfortunately, many tabletop games are not cataloged. Diane and her colleagues conducted a survey of libraries with tabletop games in 2015. They found that only 31% of the respondents consistently catalog their tabletop games. 51% of the respondents don't catalog their games at all, and 18% of the respondents catalog their games sometimes. And this is a real concern if you want your patrons to be able to find these items. And this leads us to the question, why are so many librarians reluctant to catalog their 3D materials? We think it has something to do with concerns about perfection. Of course, when you're inputting records into OCLC, your record should accurately represent the item, it should be free of typographical errors, and you should be following cataloging rules. But instead of agonizing over the perfect record, we would like to refer to 2 questions that David Bade recommended that you ask when you make decisions about record content. And I am paraphrasing them as follows. First of all, what data elements are needed by your library users? And secondly, how much of that information can your institution afford to provide? We also need to remember that we are in a cooperative cataloging environment. Amy Turner wrote that cooperative cataloging is a distributed, ongoing process. Any cataloger with a full-level authorization or higher can participate in OCLC's expert community and make changes to many World Catmaster bibliographic records. Of course, there are some limitations, but this is an important way in which we can enhance the quality of shared records to benefit our library community. One way of enhancing the discoverability of a catalog record is to add genre form terms. A genre form term indicates what a resource is, not what it's about. For example, if I were cataloging a world globe, I could assign the genre term of globes. This goes in the 655 field of a marked bibliographic record, and the delimiter 2 subfield indicates the vocabulary from which this term was taken. In this case, LCGFT refers to Library of Congress genre form terms for library and archival materials. Specialized thesauri of genre terms have been around for a long time, and here I've listed 2 sources that are well known, and each one of these sources includes some genre terms for 3D materials. The Art and Architecture thesaurus was first developed by the Getty Research Institute in the 1970s. It's been revised since that time, and it's now available online. Another well-known source is Genre Terms, a thesaurus for use in rare book and special collections cataloging. This was first issued in 1983 by the Rare Book and Manuscript section of ACRL. It's since been issued in another edition, and it's now available online. The Library of Congress began developing the Library of Congress genre form terms for library and archival materials in 2007. And they're using a project-based approach to this work, and they're working on one discipline at a time. And here you can see the 9 projects they've worked on so far. And they've worked on some of these projects in collaboration with library professional organizations. For example, the music project was completed in partnership with the Music Library Association. In some cases, the needs of libraries have not been met by existing lists of genre terms, so librarians have developed their own lists of terms to facilitate retrieval for collections of artist books, chemistry and engineering literature, foreign films, and video games. And in our library, we created a genre term vocabulary for tabletop games, and Diane will be talking more about that later this hour. Another strategy to enhance discovery of 3D materials is the use of facets. Facets are clearly defined subcategories that you can use to narrow your search results. And you see this all the time on e-commerce websites. For example, if you go to the Zappos website and you're looking for that perfect pair of stiletto heels to wear to work in a cataloging department, just like everybody else wears, you can narrow your search by color, size, width, price range, height of heel, on and on. Each one of those categories that you use to narrow your search is a facet. And at our library, we develop facets for tabletop games, including number of players, age of players, duration of play, and genre terms. The genre terms that we're using are the genre terms that we developed specifically for tabletop games. And now Diane will talk about the nuts and bolts of cataloging 3D materials with RDA.
Hi, today I want to talk about cataloging and why it's important to enter at least a brief record to improve finding for your three-dimensional collections. So we catalog our collections to provide access to them. Patrons browsing online catalogs miss out on all of your unique items if you don't even create a record in your catalog for them. It can be daunting to have to catalog a new type of library material. It's often hard to find documentation to get started creating these records, especially for unique materials. Literature and forum posts about cataloging discuss the finer points of a record, argue over minutiae, or lament the less than full record found in OCLC when you're just really looking to see where to start. The lack of best practices or general guides can lead to a fear of cataloging for some. Unique items that we aren't used to cataloging can slip through the cracks and end up on a shelf in the cataloging area getting all dusty. But even if there aren't best practices for cataloging unique items, you have the skills to add a brief record that provides access to serve your patrons. A brief record can be as brief or as full as your library needs to aid in finding. You get to decide the extent of the data included in your records. Catalog records are important. Bibliographic records and the item records attached to them not only help the patron, but the library by providing the information you need to improve and grow your new collection. So don't let the form of an item scare you away from cataloging it. Take the bull by the horns, lift them up off the shelf, dust them off, and catalog them. It's not too difficult to add a brief record into your system for all of your unique items. Here is a bull. The bottom of the bull just says Nandi. A lot of people might just stop there and put it back on the shelf. But you have enough information to create a record. With a little bit of research, you can often find enough to create a brief record that provides access to everything in your library. These brief records serve a noble purpose. Don't discount them. The records provide access until a full record can be created by you or someone else with expertise in the field. Embrace these brief records and use them to provide excellent service to your patrons. Much like our bull statue, both of these bits of records are sufficient for finding. Is your user looking for a tabletop game like Love Letter or an Arduino device called a Makey? Both of these get your user to that item. You want to make sure that your brief records meet your library's minimal record requirements while also fulfilling user needs. User needs might differ between different types of collections, but even a brief record is better than no record at all in your system. So let's look a bit closer at cataloging Realia and three-dimensional items. Three-dimensional items are just another type of material. Don't let the uniqueness of an item throw you for a loop. You'll describe it just like you describe anything else. Your goal is to provide enough information for finding. So let's stop Realia from being the dusty item on the back shelf in your cataloging area. So if you're creating a new record in OCLC, it can sort of be confusing when you start with a visual record for Realia, but that's where you're going to start. You do your best in choosing a material type. The type of specificity that you wish to have for your collection, along with the type of record, brief or full, that you're creating, can guide you here. As with all other cataloging, consistency is key. If you have 10 three-dimensional items in your library collection, just using Realia is probably fine. If you have all types of collections, games, original artwork, or toys, you want to use appropriate terms for all of your material types to aid in faceting and finding. The physical description includes the extent of the item and its dimensions. Along with this type are 3 new RDA fields. These are the content type, media type, and carrier type. Content type includes the information on how the work is expressed. These are all three-dimensional forms. Media type includes the type of intermediation device needed to use the item. How do you play it? We don't need anything to be able to play these except our hands, so it's unmediated, no devices needed. Carrier type is a type of storage or housing that relates back to the intermediation device. These are all objects, so again, no intermediation devices needed. The RDA fields for Realia are the same across all types of Realia. You can Add additional fields for other materials in the box if needed to fully describe your collection for your users. But again, the user needs should guide you as you create your records. Most of the descriptive data needed will be just put in note fields. There's more freedom in how to use these fields. Just remember that consistency across the collection is your goal and makes life much easier as it grows. So let's look at some items that we've cataloged in our library. So here's a game. It's a tabletop game. For this game, we've listed the mark fixed field that you'll use. It's a three-dimensional form. You'll use Realia. It's a type of record field, and the type of material is game. It's as simple as that. I'll talk a bit more about a Mark 300 physical description in a bit, but I want you to see how RDA treats the three-dimensional forms. Again, this game has a content type of three-dimensional form. The media type shows the general type of device used to run it. This is unmediated. It doesn't need a device. The carrier type is a predominant part of the manifestation, and this is just an object, a three-dimensional artifact or naturally occurring object. We'll move on to another type of item. This is a makerspace item. This is an Arduino or makey board. So this is an example of an item that's not a game, but it's still Realia. The basic elements of the record are the same. It's a Realia record with a type of material Realia. Again, it's a three-dimensional form that is unmediated and an object. You might get stumped on this a bit because the device needs a computer to run for its output, but at this time, it's still an unmediated object according to RDA. You can provide additional information about any system details and general information about what's needed to run this device in the note fields. This information will help your users decide if this device is appropriate for their needs. And here are a few other types of Realia that we have in our library. You can see the choices for physical description of the primary objects stay the same across these items. The size of the collection and the need for granularity can help guide you as you choose the type of material code to assign. And I hope this brief look at some of the RDA descriptive fields eases your mind about their use for 3D forms. These fields are new and they seem a bit daunting until you realize they stay the same across all of the items. So let's move on to what you do know, how to add a title. RDA gives a list of the acceptable sources for titles. Once you catalog a few similar items, you'll get the hang of where the acceptable titles are, and this part becomes easy. Again, you have your trusty cataloger's judgment to help you. The title for many three-dimensional forms is often the box, instructions, label, or website. Don't get bogged down in this task. It's easy to miss the forest for the trees. You're describing the item as a whole, and do your best to find a source that fits this need. If you can't find a title using a preferred source, you just make a note about where you got the title from in the record. And here are a few examples. Production, publication, distribution, manufacturing, copyright. We've got a lot to look at there, and sometimes there's a lot on the box. So again, you're going to use your cataloger's judgment. You're going to use what you already know from cataloging other items, and you're going to do your best to include the information. Again, you can always default down to the generic fields of place of distribution not identified. You always have that. Your goal is to get a record into your system. And back to the description. So the extent of the description in the Mark 300 field, again, is based on your library and user needs. This slide shows ways in which you can describe an item that fulfills the needs of basic finding. You can say it's a game, or it's a game with 4 tokens, or it's a game with 4 tokens and 2 are red and 2 are blue. It can be made of just various materials, or it can be plastic or wood or cardboard, and it's in a container and you need to measure it. So it's height times width times depth. It's as easy as adding in anything else that you're adding a 300 to in any other sort of item. The notes. The notes is where the fun starts. Besides the note on the title source, there are other notes to help your user choose the right item. Again, the specificity of your notes will depend on the type of record you're creating, a brief or full record, and your user needs. Does your university offer classes in game design? It might be nice to include the designers in a 508 field. Does your device need an Arduino to work? Add a note. What does this device support? Add a note. Does your device only work on a 35mm camera? Add a note. And what age is recommended? Add a note. Where'd you get that title? Add a note. Is a guide in several languages? Add the note. What's included? Add a note. Do you have to use this device while standing on your right foot facing north? Just add a note. will be great benefit to your users to see what's needed. Now we'll move on to some records from our collection. No best practices from an association exist, so we've just used the general guidance to create our records. We've included fields our players need when looking for a game. These fields include the duration of play, number of players, and the age of player. We also include a summary of the game, which generally includes information about gameplay. This information is often coded differently in a local 590 to facilitate our faceting, and we'll look at that a little closer later on. Here's another record. This is a makerspace item. So it includes the same standard information as our tabletop game, but the notes are a bit different. We're looking at a different audience here. The notes are focused on guiding our user as they choose their makerspace items. There might be information related to the device's software compatibility and specifications. Our goal is to provide enough information in the catalog for users to know exactly what their item is and its compatibility with other items. We don't want someone driving across Dallas to pick up the wrong item. We have a brain record here. So this is a model, and you can see the addition of multiple content and carrier types in this record. Here's another record with multiple content and carrier types. The delimiter 3 notes which part of the work is being described. The need to add a physical description for every piece of your manifestation can be set locally. Where is a happy medium for your library? What do your users need to find and use an item? So the record examples we just saw were not brief records. The extent of the information that you add to your records depends on your users. You can use your cataloger's judgment as you create these records. In this example, the first 300 is fine for a minimal record providing access to your collection. The second gives a bit more information that might vary depending on the extent of information needed by your users. The extent of the content, media, or carrier also depend on your user needs. What do they need to successfully navigate your collection and find their item? You can stop with one 336 listing the work as a three-dimensional form, or add multiple 336 for additional items that accompany the manifestation. One more item to discuss. So right now there is some talk about three-dimensional form versus tactile three-dimensional form. Again, you can set this on your own, but we've decided that tactile are things that you do have to touch, not things you're just picking up. You have to use touch, such as Braille, or it requires a specific area you have to touch to use the item. So that is how we're using tactile. So most of our Realia is a three-dimensional form and not a tactile three-dimensional form. So here are a few resources that you can use. Be sure to check the RDA toolkit. Some of these resources are already out of date in a few areas because it's still in flux. And I want to leave you in this section to remember that you're cataloging your collection for your users. Don't get bogged down in minutia. Don't not catalog things. You need to be helping your users with a record. You're cataloging three-dimensional items. They're not difficult to catalog. They're just different. And next, we'll look at genre terms. So the University of North Texas started collecting and cataloging games in 2009. And as we begin to catalog this new collection, we found there were few established headings sufficient for describing it fully. This collection isn't the only one in need of more robust headings. Many libraries have unique collections that are in need of established headings that are broad enough to cover the collection, yet concise enough to ease finding. What do you do if you run into this problem? If you can't find sufficient headings to describe your collection, you can create them and share them, just like we've done. If possible, create them in the authority file with the appropriate granularity. You want to have broader, narrower, and related terms to ease finding. Different collections have different terms. The genre term tabletop games might be sufficient if you have a collection of 20 games. You can direct your users to that collection easily with just the one term. The potential growth of your collection determines the headings you might need to describe it sufficiently. Use your knowledge of the resources, but don't forget to ask your patrons questions too. They'll be using terms that are for their hobby, and they can help you out. Here's a screenshot of Board Game Geek. So we use Board Game Geek as our resource for tabletop games, and they helped us with our headings. If you don't know anything about tabletop games, it's a good place to go to get a general guidance on what you might want to input. It's a fairly reliable source for cataloging as well. They include most of the information related to the game, and you can go in there and see the classifications that they've given it. So we decided to establish our term. So at the start of the process, our collection was fairly small with only about 250 games. It was easy to browse with just a term of tabletop games. We didn't need more granular terms, but we knew the collection would grow. So we created a basic list from the type, category, and mechanisms that Board Game Geek provided with a few other additions. We chose 50 terms, so we now have 50 tabletop game terms that we use, and we can search from our broadest for everything in our collection, and then we've branched down into more granular terms. We emphasize terms that relate to our collection and our goals for its use. This included basic types of games, mechanics, and educational terms. Our goal is to promote the use of games in curriculum development. So here's a screenshot, and it shows some of the headings from our genre list. We included broader and narrower terms, general information about the term, and where we found the term. To encourage the use of tabletop games and curriculum development here at UNT, we added a field, and it lists the educational alignments to Common Core and the Texas Essential Skills and Knowledge, TEKS. They're input into a 658 mark field for curriculum objectives. It's a good way to co-locate these items together. And this sort of information helps improve finding and is very specific to an individual library's goals. At this time, we only have 56 games that we classify as educational games. All games are educational in some way, but these games are made to support learning. And here we have a picture of some of our educational games. As you can see, they're all very related specifically to supporting education. They're all still fun to play, though, too. So they serve two purposes. So we have listed our genre terms in our UNT Digital Library. We'll be showing this link again at the end of the webinar. And then I'm going to go ahead and hand over to Kevin, who will start talking about how we're using faceting. And you can see here some of our word cloud of the terms that we've used in our genre terms.
Well, thanks, Diane. I'm now going to talk about facets. And while facets are not new to searching, either inside or outside of a library, they can really help provide access to a unique collection and allow that collection to become much more discoverable. They can provide a lot of detail without a lot of clutter, and the terms can come from almost any information in a record. Facets facilitate easier browsing of a non-traditional collection or unique collection because most users are already familiar with facets. And since the terms themselves come from within information you have already put in the record, they can be easily tailored to that specific collection or to a group that will use that collection, because providing access to users is very important. However, when determining if you want to use facets for a particular collection, the main question you have to ask, how do you want to see / how do you want facets used? Take into consideration the size of your collection, as Diane mentioned, as well as the types of materials in your collection. A collection of puzzles is going to be different than a collection of tabletop games. If facets are desired, be sure to think about the balance of terms you want. While the terms should be specific to the collection and the users, they should also not be too granular, because this could have the opposite effect and make browsing cluttered. We also have to remember that facets are flexible. You have to remember that facets are flexible. They're not meant to be a nuisance to either you cataloging this or to the patron using the information. Facet terms can come, as I say, from any part of the record, so all your hard work creating this record, making it wonderful, or using a simple record does not have to be redone in any way. The terms you can use can come from note fields, more specialized fields, or even local fields that you use, as we did, specifically for facet terms. Also, do not worry about getting everything perfect the first time. With today's technology, we can easily update records and add and update terms as uses change, as groups change, as people needing different things change. Remember, we're not printing cards anymore. For us, we wanted facets that would really help browsing, since our game collection is also in closed stacks. We were already creating and inputting genre terms, as Diane and Kathy mentioned earlier, and we knew that this would be a good place to start. However, we also wanted patron input, and we wanted to know how they look for games. We received a lot of various responses through informal chats at the service desk, but the overwhelming consensus was that patrons look for duration of play, age range, and number of players. We as catalogers concluded that these pieces of information can be easily found on game boxes and inserted into a record. I've included a couple different examples here, from a big board game to a small deck of cards. This information is found on most all games. It's a pretty standard feature. You want to make sure that it's easy for you to find, because making cataloging easier for yourself is a key point. If you have to search and dig for information, it is less likely to make it into your record, and therefore will not be any help to your users. We now want to show exactly how we used facets in our game records. What you see here is a record for the board game Ticket to Ride. It's an abbreviated record of sorts, so I didn't include all of the fields, but most of the important things are still here. We are using the appropriate Mark 655 for our genre terms, and this was an easy place for us to start pulling these facets from. You can also see that we coded them as local, and using the subfield 5, coded them specific to our institution. Again, this is something that we do because we are sharing our records. Your institution might not need to do that, but it's something that we do. Always checking with your institution is absolutely key. For other information the users wanted, they were listed, as Diane mentioned, in notes. Notes are extremely helpful, but they're unstructured. And this helps patrons if they run across and find a single record or are doing a keyword search and your note fields are indexed. But we wanted to make faceting on these fields easier. After talking to our IT person, we made the decision to create structured codes around age range, duration, and player information. This allowed our back-end faceting system, Blacklight, to pull these codes from the record and append any label we chose. This also means that if we determine the labels that will show to the patrons need to change in the future as their needs change or as the collection grows, we won't have to update a lot of individual records. We only need to update the crosswalk between our code and the term shown through Blacklight. Here are the labels we chose under each of our 3 faceted groups: duration of play, number of players, and recommended age. You can see that we did not include under recommended age 0 to 1 because most people in that age range are not playing tabletop games. We wanted the facets to ultimately function well. And how they function on your end will depend on your faceting backend system and how your ILS interprets those facets. We chose these common groupings as found on the games themselves, and then each of the breakdowns got a particular code, as you saw in the previous example of a record. Remember, these codes can be whatever is useful for you and can be representative of whatever is needed in the record and whatever facet term you desire. Here's a practical example of some of the game records in a test instance of our faceted catalog. This test catalog was set up using about 200,000 or so records that our IT person pulled from our traditional catalog and applied facets to. These facets came from many different areas of many different records, more so than we previously discussed here. That's why there are so many running down the left side of the screen. But you can still see that they are, as in all the different e-commerce websites and different websites around, they're running down the left side of the screen where they're typically located, making it easy for patrons to identify them as facets. If we expand the genre facet, you can see that there are many, many terms listed, more so than even those that we used for tabletop games. But we promise all of our terms are there. If we zoom in under this particular genre heading, you can see that at the time this test instance was developed, we had 480 items that had the term tabletop games. If this facet is then selected, we can open up the other three facets that we talked about: duration, number of players, recommended age. If we expand them, we see, as you do, the different terms listed under each and the associated number of records that have that particular term. Each group includes all of these various labels and the coded subcategories to make it easy for players and users to find them, identify them, and use these particular facets. Here is an example of functionality. As you can see, I have selected tabletop games, 2 to 4 players, 30 minutes to an hour, and then age range of 5 to 9 years. Through selecting these facets, I returned 68 results. In another example, I only selected 3 facets: tabletop games, dice games, and a game duration of less than 30 minutes. Even with fewer facets, I got fewer results, only 34 this time. And while I was selecting these facets, the numbers along the left-hand side of the screen that we saw earlier update. And they're actively changing to represent the number of records that still exist within the facet perimeters that have that particular label. This really helps discoverability because users can easily see how many more results are available in your catalog with that particular facet. One thing I do want to stress, though, all of these facets are wonderful, all of this technology is wonderful, but it is very, very important that you have a conversation with your IT people. This is frequently overlooked. You get catalogers get great ideas, but if we don't know how to implement them, the ideas could be lost. I spoke with our IT librarian, our systems librarian, and he gave me a few pointers to note when having these discussions. First, know that every situation is unique. Ours was, our collection was, your collections are not like our collections. You have to know your library and know that its goals are specialized. By going in with this information, you can tailor your requests and have a better conversation. Second, you have to know your library's structure. Do you have the IT people and the resources available to run an open source system like we did, Blacklight? Or do you need to use a more vendor-based system for your facets? Keeping this in mind while researching the facet options that you have open to you, if you keep this in mind, your conversation with the IT people and the department will go much more smoothly because you're already working within their established structure for something you and the patrons want. Third, build on what already works. As Diane alluded to, cooperation is key. That is the same across all of cataloging. We're all friends. We all want to help each other out. Talk to other catalogers, talk to other libraries, see what worked for them and how they worked with their IT people. If you use and build on this other information, you will have greater success. Lastly, always have an advocate. If you have support from colleagues or a supervisor, your request and discussion will hold that much more weight. In summary, we just want to remind you that cataloging is extremely important. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Technology allows for easy correction and easy cooperation. Trust yourself. Trust your cataloger's judgment. Know what you're doing and know that if a mistake is made, it can be fixed. Discoverability is key, and cataloging unique collections makes them discoverable. Users will actually know what a library has because it's no longer just sitting on a shelf in the back. Also, use available technology. It can really have an impact on efficient and effective catalog searching. Results will be more useful and meaningful to users, and they will have an easier time searching the catalog because it will more closely resemble other search interfaces they're already using. Ultimately, though, our main point is just catalog it. Users want to know what a library has and be able to access its resources. Here is the same link that Diane provided earlier to a list of our local genre terms that began this whole process of creating facets. We also have a link to a handout. It has a bibliography of resources that we used as well as a catalog record example if you want to do further research and investigation yourself. Finally, I want to give a very extra special thanks to our resource discovery systems librarian, Jason Tamale. Without his help and his willingness to do awesome and amazing things, we would not have been able to facet as well and use some of the really cool technology and techniques mentioned here in this presentation. Thank you all so very much for listening. We hope you enjoyed it, learned something, and will be able to take something away for your libraries and your institutions. We would now love to open the floor for questions.
Okay, thank you. First, can you mention, do you have another ILS besides Blacklight, or I was a little confused about, is that just for facets or that is your ILS?
We're still in transition with that because currently we're using Sierra. Sierra is our ILS, and that's what, that's our backside catalog, and we have a ILS on that side, but we're going to be using the information, and this is something that Jason knows much more about. We're going to be using the information contained within our catalog, then running it through Blacklight, essentially, in various server configurations. We're going to be running it through Blacklight, and then it will become our user interface, a much prettier, much nicer looking interface than what the example was here in our test instance, but that will ultimately become the user interface side of our OPAC, essentially, will be run through Blacklight.
Oh, okay, thank you. There's a question, why didn't you ask for a new mark code to use for your genre terms instead of just using local?
I think it's just the time that, I mean, now board games is a genre term now, so it's just the process of getting that done. So we were hoping to create genre terms that are similar enough to what we hope LC will actually, they'll pick, so that ours won't change, but it's just the time involved of trying to get things created through Library of Congress and getting those terms done. So, but now board games was created this summer. So we have a really large collection, and just getting the terms ready so that can be used now. And that's sort of the whole goal of this presentation too, is that it's not to just wait for things to happen, to make them happen, and to just get your stuff cataloged and to create genre terms if you need them, but to also do it within the parameters that are sort of already set, so that hopefully when they do create them, they're creating things that match what we've already done.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Person who asked that also commented that the process is very quick to get a new code. It just takes a few days.
And the genre term? You're talking about the code. Yeah.
Oh, no, yeah, we haven't done the code yet. I was talking about genre terms. Yeah, we haven't done it yet. We will.
Yeah, that's high on our priority list of things to do soon.
So
But
this
it's
comes
just
with managing a big game collection.
Yeah.
So it's just those mad scrambling that we're doing to just manage a giant game collection that's evolving rapidly, and just getting that code done. So we do have that to be done, and we do hope to get these codes into a repository so people can see those a little easier to get our terms. So some of that is just getting it done, which I'm sure all you guys are running into as well.
Okay, do you have any tips for cataloging virtual reality devices? What would the 336, 337, 338 be?
You know, those are still just considered three-dimensional forms. And right now, we are just showing those with this just, you know, the unmediated object, where the information that we're using in those records is really, we're using the notes to show what they need. Right now, we're not even really showing the specifications for the computer and stuff for that. It's just a headset. Some of that we have not created. We haven't created records that are, ours are in-house use, so we're not as worried that much about the PC specifications and then what they need to work on, because they have very specific graphic card needs. So that is listed in some records, and you might list that. If I was circulating those out to the public, I would make sure that the graphic card specifications were known so people would know. Because those content and carrier media types are generally not displayed to the public, they're probably a way to facet at some point. Really, your note fields need to carry that information to your users, and that's what some of our using the notes is. We need to really let our users see that if you want to take the HTC Vive headset home, you need to know that you need this graphic card to play it. And there are ways to test your machines before you ever even check out that equipment. So maybe including that test link into some sort of record so people can test it before they come to the library would be good too. But right now, ours are all in-house use, so we have not run into that issue.
Okay, if my library has a variety of 3D material, what would you recommend, or would you recommend that we use broad genre terms? For example, game, globe. Otherwise, many terms might be used only once, and the long list of terms won't help users narrow down by the broader category of material.
Yeah, that's the way I feel.
Yeah, I would definitely use, you know, again, just depending on the collection. If you have a wide, it's really talking about width as opposed to depth. If you have a wide collection of a lot of things, but there's not very many within those, just using a simple genre term would be great. But if one of those collections has a lot in it, then you may want to get more specific, because you're absolutely right. One term only related to one item is not going to help anybody.
Okay, thank you. You did not mention the 385 audience characteristics controlled vocabulary field. Are you using it?
No, we're an academic library, so some of the audience terms for our collections are not, we don't focus on those as much because we just collect everything and assume most people are adults using it. So no, we're not using using that.
It absolutely could be.
Yeah, so that again is your collection. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you need it, this is one of the things that we run into is people try to fit this box for cataloging a record, and you really need to think of your users as you're cataloging. So if you need that field, definitely use that field. If you don't, then don't worry about it. So we need to, our whole focus too is to quit worrying about fitting that specific box that someone created, because it may not be your box. You want to go get that other box over there. So do what you need for your users.
Okay, have you thought of adding links to your records for directions for games that get lost?
For when the rules are lost, the rule books are lost?
Right, I think they mean like the directions maybe are online and you could add a URL.
Yeah, we haven't done that yet. I think we would if we were seeing things were getting lost. Some of that is finding a stable link, or if we want to download it and upload it to a server here that we know is stable. So some of that's just having a stable source, that we know is not going to just go dead on us. We have not had any issues circulating our games with loss. So if that helps anyone to know that, we have not had hardly any loss with hundreds and hundreds of circulations. So it's not really been an issue.
Okay, are you considering submitting LCGFT proposals to add to that controlled vocabulary?
I guess we could take things further. We hadn't really
talked about it. I mean, yeah, it's a fabulous idea, and we will certainly now look into it. It's been on our radar, but one of those things we just haven't done a lot with at the moment.
Okay. How do you classify 3D material? Do they get regular call numbers?
We do not. We use a session number, so we do not have to worry about that. And I do see a lot of people worried about that, but we don't have to worry about that aspect of it at all. So.
The session numbers really do help with these more unique collections, I think, rather than having to force, not necessarily force, but put a call number on something that wasn't necessarily designed for the call number structure. We use them for also a lot of our audio materials and things as well. Various online recordings or CDs that circulate with our music library, more session numbers as opposed to just strict call numbers.
Okay, how do you deal with expansion packs? Do you just add those on to the main record for the main game, or do you do separate records for those?
It depends. It depends on how big it is. We do work with our users. Like some games, like, of course, Cards Against Humanity. Some of the games that are going to get more and more packs, we just have a giant case, and everything is in that case, and it's a single record with a 505 that lists all the expansion packs there. So if someone looks for the title of an expansion and it's just been added to the main game, all that is just in the same bibliographic record, and it serves as a single item as well. So that's how we're dealing with that. We are also using the same accession numbers for things that are different editions. Like all of our Clue games sit together, but one might be the World of Warcraft Clue, or what are all the crazy Clue games? There's a lot of
Office Clue.
Yeah, so we do sort of, because we do have closed stacks, but we do still shelf like items together. So all our Clue games are together, all our Munchkins are together, and so some of that I think is still in flux. Like our collection is getting rather large. It's at about 700 items, and it still seems to be working well. So some of it is seeing things go from a small collection that's manageable, and what do we need to do to make it keep working as it grows? And we may be changing our mind as it gets bigger and bigger, which you see a lot of time with new collections.
Okay, have you considered making MARC proposals to create a new field to encode your game characteristics, like number of players, duration, etc.?
No, we haven't.
Yeah, we have not considered that at all. It's a good thought, though.
Okay. How often do you need to replace games due to wear?
We have not had to replace any due to wear. We just have not had any issues. we've had lots of different unique collections, and every one of our fears with all of our unique collections, starting with video games and to board games and to VR, have not ever come to fruition. But we also built a community that's pretty respectful of what they check out, and we are an academic library with closed stacks. So I'm not sure how all of that plays together, but so far we are not having to deal with any sort of damage or loss or any sort of things that we thought would happen. So we've been lucky. But also across the library land, I'm hearing some of the same things from other people. So I think with these collections that we shouldn't be afraid of them at all, and we should just throw them out there and see what happens.
Yeah, and even if the collection does not necessarily circulate like ours does, still having the information discoverable in the catalog is good. You know, you can keep a closer eye on pieces and things if it doesn't circulate, but still, if it's not in the catalog, users couldn't find it.
And do you catalog laptops and all your other equipment with full mark records?
We do. Well, I don't have full mark records for everything because we have an escape room collection, so we have locks and hasps and stuff like that. So those are just on a escape room item record, and I just add them all in there because those are not visible to our users. We're going to catalog our breakout scenarios instead. But we do try to put a record in for everything. And you know, sometimes I'm still the same person that wants to put it on the shelf and let it get dusty, and I have to tell myself, no, you did that webinar, you need to catalog it. So we're really trying to not set things aside and to just get some records into OCLC for them. They may not be really robust records, but they are records, because I know it's, even when I'm cataloging, just finding something and making it fit is easier than having to create it from scratch. So I'm trying to keep putting records in there, and everyone should feel free to edit whatever we put in there and make it fit your library.
Okay, and probably the last question we have time for is, has RDA made it easier to catalog 3D material? The new 33X fields seem useful.
I don't know that it's made it easier. It's just different. I think it still like it still feels like the three-dimensional items are a bit of a, or forms are a little bit of an afterthought. So we are still sort of seeing where, when we start looking at makerspace items and how some of those fields work for those, that we're going to have some local fields maybe that describe those a little better, and how we might facet off some stuff in those 3XX fields. That's just me though. Someone else might think it's great. So really my goal is we need to get something in there so people can check it out and use it, because really our whole collection runs off the statistics that are shown from these records. So if someone can find it and use it, and we can show they used it, we get more money to buy more of it. So it's just getting the records in there, having them be findable and discoverable, and have more people use our collection so we can show the numbers. So all of that. So if RDA helps that and helps you get your records in there, great. And I would love to see just the data that we need in the record to be able to create those layers to make finding. And if that's described through RDA, find. If there's a mark field, we're lucky that Blacklight can pull from anywhere. So we can put anything in the record and Blacklight can pass it off of it. So that's nice for us.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Catherine, Diane, and Kevin, for your informative webinar making games and other 3D materials discoverable to your users. Thank you to all our attendees. We hope you found today's session useful. You will soon receive a short online evaluation form along with links to today's recording and slides. Please take a few minutes to respond to the questions and return the form to us. Your comments are very valuable and help the ALCTS committee improve its webinars and plan future events. ALCTS now offers certificates of attendance to webinar participants. More information on this will be included in the email you receive. Information about all ALCTS webinars can be found on the ALCTS homepage. Please check out our web courses and upcoming e-forums. Suggestions for webinars and other continuing education opportunities are welcome at any time. You can contact any member of the ALCTS committee or submit a proposal for a webinar using the online form on the ALCTS webpage under Online Learning. I would like to thank Wanda Jazzieri and Felicity Dicus for providing technical support webinar. The support they and their colleagues on the Technical Support Subcommittee provide make it possible for us to present these webinars smoothly. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and we hope you will participate in other ALCTS CE events again in the future.